In addition to his entrepreneurial interests, Bryant has been appointed by both Democratic and Republican administrations, Congress, and the United States Export-Import Bank to advise on our nation's trade policies. He serves on the Seattle Port Commission because it is one of the few positions in King County where a citizen can work to both create jobs and protect our environment. He believes doing both simultaneously is the challenge of our generation. Please help me welcome Seattle Port Commissioner Bill Bryant.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity to come talk to you about the importance of international trade to our local economy. And as you kind of gathered from that introduction, this isn't just a speech for me. This really has been a focal point of my entire career. As was mentioned, right out of school, I went to work for Governor Spellman and headed up the Governor's Trade Council. And in that capacity, I was charged with working on a number of issues that were confronting our state's international trade economy. Some of them were very specific, immediate issues, and some of them were more long-range, such as how does our tax policies affect our international competitiveness. And then I went and moved to Yakima, and for 7 years worked with the tree fruit industry, where I eliminated unfair trade barriers and negotiated with foreign governments to open up new markets for our apple, pear, and cherry exporters, and then set up the company. And as a result of my experience working for the apple industry, I then began working, as Chris mentioned, with the potato industry, with hops. We also now represent the wine industry, as well as continuing our work with tree fruit. And then 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago now, I decided to run for a seat on the Port Commission. And so I've almost come full circle, and now I'm not only working on day-to-day issues that immediately affect our exporters, but I'm also now in a position where I need to focus on some of the competitive threats to our trade economy. When we talk about Washington State's economy, we really cannot separate, or we shouldn't, and I don't think that we can, separate having competitive, vibrant ports in Puget Sound. Can't separate that from having a vibrant international trade economy, and you cannot separate having vibrant ports and an international trade economy from having an overall healthy economy in our state. In Washington State, those three, healthy ports, a healthy international trade economy, and a healthy state economy overall, are just too integrated. And that's because Washington State is the most trade-dependent state in the Union. Now, we hear that a lot, but what does it really mean? Well, let me give you some perspective on what it really means in terms of jobs here in Washington State. Of all of the states that export around the world, we are fourth. First is Texas. Second is California. Third is New York. And the fourth largest exporting state in the United States is Washington. Now, California, Texas, and New York are a lot larger than Washington. So on a per capita basis, we're exporting much more than any other state in the United States. In fact, on a per capita basis, we're exporting over $10,000 in value per person who lives in Washington State. That's 3 times the national average. What I think is even more stunning is the fact that almost 25% of everything we produce in Washington State is exported. Approximately 1 in 3 jobs in Washington State is directly tied to exports. And those jobs tend to pay about 46% more than the state average job. Simply put, in Washington State, international trade is one of the most important job generators. Now, I certainly know this from my perspective on the other side of the pass over on the coast when I look just at King, Snohomish, and Pierce County, which are most directly affected by the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. And if you look at the 3 primary job generators in King, Snohomish, and Pierce County, they're Microsoft, Boeing, and the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. Each is responsible for about 100,000 jobs. And if you look at Boeing, Microsoft, and the ports, clearly those jobs in each case are directly tied to international trade. But it's not just over on the coast. If you come over on this side of the pass, jobs are directly related to trade as well. In fact, we heard Chris say that, 50% of the potatoes that are grown in this area are exported. Let me tell you that 1/3 1/3 of all of our agricultural production in Washington State is exported overseas. I have a friend who runs a hay operation up in Ellensburg, and I was chatting with him the other day about the need to keep I-90 open and the importance of our transportation system between Ellensburg and the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. And he said that up to 50% of his payroll is dependent on having competitive ports in Puget Sound and having a transportation system that will link Ellensburg to the ports in Seattle and Tacoma. The wine industry exports over $12 million every year of wine from this community all over the world. And as a matter of fact, my company was just here last week with a bunch of wine buyers from as far away as India and Europe, helping them visit a number of wineries so that we can increase our exports even more. When I was hired in 1985 to work with the apple industry, one of the reasons why they asked me to come over and work with them is because we were looking at a 50 million box crop. And people weren't quite sure in 1985 how we were going to market 50 million boxes of apples profitably. And at that time, we were exporting probably about 10% of our crop. So let's say we were exporting about 5 million boxes. This year, and generally any year now, we will have 100 million boxes of apples. And we will be exporting 30% of the crop, or about 30 million. And 10% of the crop, not 10% of the exports, 10% of the crop, 10 million boxes roughly, will go to Mexico alone. That's how dependent a lot of these industries have become on our international markets. And our sponsor today, the potato industry, as Chris let us know, is no exception. If you look at U.S. statistics for processed potato products, and these are U.S., they're not Washington State, but I'll tell you, most of these statistics are coming out of communities between Quincy and Pasco. The U.S. potato industry exports $687 million in frozen potato products and over $119 million every year in dehydrated potato products. Now, these aren't just statistics. I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in all the numbers. But these statistics represent jobs in this community. These statistics represent income that supports school levies and local businesses and shops. And these statistics, in many ways, are the foundation of local economies and neighborhoods all across our state. And if you want to see how important international trade has become to neighborhoods and local economies all across our state, all we have to do is look what happens when we lose it. Here's one example, one that many of you are probably familiar with. And that is, until recently, Mexico was the processed potato industry's third largest export market, and it was the fastest growing market for processed potato products. The United States, and it really was largely the Pacific Northwest and Washington State, our products dominated the Mexican market, especially for fries, until we had a dispute about a year ago. And as some of you might know, under the North American Free Trade Agreement that was negotiated well over a decade ago now, the United States was supposed to allow goods coming up to the United States on Mexican trucks, as long as they met all of our safety and driver standards, to come on into the United States and deliver their goods on Mexican trucks. And we've never done that. We've never allowed the Mexican trucks in. And so Mexico took the United States to NAFTA since they thought we were out of compliance, and it was found that we were out of compliance. We weren't implementing the agreement. And rather than retaliate, the Bush administration decided to set up a pilot project that would phase this in. And Mexico said, fine, we'll go along with this pilot project. But a little over a year ago, the Congress stripped all funding and shut down the pilot project. And Mexico said enough. And they retaliated against a number of products, including frozen potato products, which was within their rights, given the fact that we were the ones who were out of compliance with the agreement. But that 20% tariff that Mexico has placed on frozen potato products since April of 2009 has seen our sales to Mexico fall by 39%. Now, much of that loss, as I said, is coming out of communities between Quincy and Pasco. And it's not as if Mexico has just stopped buying frozen fries. They haven't. They're still buying fries. They're just buying them from Canada. Canada is filling the void. So in effect, we are exporting $33 million of potato income to Canada. The ConAgra plant closing is an expression of how dependent our local economies are on having access to international markets.